some others that have asked it. And so we are talking about boundaries. And if you take a look at the list that is on the wall over there, I moved some of those numbers around. Everybody stare at Cynthia, make her uncomfortable, right? But I moved the list around just a little bit to kind of change kind of the flow of the class. That's not where exactly we're going to stay specifically, but that kind of gives us an idea of how we're going to talk about and how we're going to walk through this concept of boundaries in our life. And so we talked quite at length last week. I suggested that we are following this book here. I don't know how many of you have read it. If you haven't read it, you're missing out on a good book on setting boundaries in our life. I would encourage you to get a copy of it and start the book, kind of read through it. It talks through a lot of good information. That's kind of be my guide as we walk through the concept of boundaries and as we continue to go forward. But what I wanted to talk to you today about, what are boundaries? For the most part, and maybe not the first question here is legitimate boundaries, but maybe we need to talk about just what are boundaries? How do we live boundaries? Henry Cloud describes boundaries in the same context of property lines. They are the way we define ourselves. Boundaries can come in many different ways. Physical boundaries, mental boundaries, emotional boundaries, spiritual boundaries, right? Those are high level, generic ideas on what boundaries are. And really, we have boundaries in every part of our life. Henry Cloud says that boundaries are what separate us from the next person. This is my space. That's what?
Your space.
Your space, right? I have my space. You have your space. We all have our own space, and those property lines define those. And how we allow those boundaries and those property lines to work in our life is really how effective we are, how successful we are, and arguably keeping ourselves sane. Y'all have anybody in your life that just wanders all over your boundaries? That's probably not a raise your hand and tell me about it type conversation, right? But it really is. Y'all have those people in your life. It can be a spouse. It can be a kid. It can be a parent. It can be any manner of family members. I know a lot of people that struggle with family members that aren't the ones that live in their homes. It's the ones that live outside of their homes, and they keep wandering in and stomping all over their boundaries because they just don't know that. We try to teach our children when they're growing up a concept called what? Personal space, right? Don't get in somebody's personal space. I'm not touching you, right? Anybody remember that? They would touch in the car. They're across the line. How many of you divided up the back seat? How many of you had a station wagon growing up? And you would subdivide the back seat between it. It's like you draw a line. Anybody remember Christmas? You'd go out there and you'd masking tape your side of the room versus your sibling's side of the room. Did anybody else do that?
No, but I do have to tell you what my dad did, because we go out west. We did not have a station wagon, just the back seat. So my older brother's 2 years older than me, so he's 18. And he's a good size, And then my little brother's 8, no big deal.
Size.
But my dad felt like, because I had a sunburn, he wanted the boys, he made them sit in the floorboard, which for their 8-year-old, no big deal, but for my 18-year-old brother, like with his knees drawn up, so I could lay down on the back seat and be comfortable. So
Guess who hated you for a long period of time?
My brothers bring that
How many
up.
would have hated her?
My brothers bring that up thinking that I'm my dad's favorite. I don't really know that to be a fact. But
Are you the only daughter?
I am the only
Oh, you are the favorite. You are the favorite.
And the plot thickens.
We were going out west, so this was like a 2 or 3 week trip.
And they had to sit on the floorboard?
Well, yeah, I was
Now, let's be honest. What kind of car was it?
Well,
Do you remember?
it was something like that.
Oh, so she had they had 9 feet on each side. Right? How many rode those giant old cars that had, Yeah.
Keith still acted like he was uncomfortable, though. I don't know.
But you're his sister, so he's got to make you feel bad. That's
Awesome. Anybody have siblings like that? Anybody have the other one is the favorite sibling? Right. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Now we have to talk about favorites later in life. All right. So what I did want to do is make a comment about what he says in the book. If you haven't had, like I said, an opportunity to get the book, I think it would be beneficial to you. But on page 31, he talks about invisible property lines and responsibilities. He says, in the physical world, boundaries are easy to see. All right? How many of you have fences? Walls. right? How did they do fences back in the original times? You all drive around and you see those rock walls all stacked up and everything, where they would create property boundaries. They'd make lines. They're much easier to see. You can see the difference in somebody's property. You can see where things belong, right? And so the physical world boundaries are easy to see. Fences, signs, walls, moats with alligators, manicured lawns, or hedges are all physical boundaries. I love a beautiful hedge. Anybody have a hedge? I have this wall of trees and overgrown brush that blocks us from the house next door. And every couple of years, Tommy and his crew from FPU want to come through and cut down all my trees. And I go out there and we raise all kinds of cane with them, because that is what is what? What is that to me? That is a boundary between me and the road and the next door neighbor, right? And they want to come down, they want to cut down my property boundary. They want to cut down that physical boundary that separates me from the neighbors, right? You know, like neighbors anyway. In their differing appearances, they give the same message. This is where my property begins. The owner of the property is legally responsible for what happens on his or her property. Non-owners are not responsible for that property. Physical boundaries mark a visible property line that someone holds the deed to. You can go to the county courthouse and find out exactly where those boundaries of responsibility are and whom to call if you have business there. So, anybody ever done a boundary survey? Do you know what I'm talking about? All right. You call the city, you hire a surveyor, they come out and mark the property boundaries. Typically, if you're having a problem with the neighbor or you're fixing to buy a property, or like my house, it was subdivided off of a larger set of properties where they came in and they did a property boundary and carved out that little 3.5 acre chunk that my house sits on. And so it set that boundary. I get really suspicious when I see somebody out there doing what to those stakes, because they're still there 11 years later. The farmer next door that owns the property next door, he's constantly out there kind of poking at those property boundaries. You ever seen him do that? Yeah. I'm always like, what's he doing? Is he moving that boundary? You know, because I don't want my property boundary what? Small. Right? I don't want it moved. I don't want it changed. I don't want anything to be different about it. Right? It says, in the spiritual world, boundaries are just as real, but often harder to see. The goal of the chapter is to help us define what intangible boundaries are. This entire chapter talks about the different kinds of boundaries and what they are. So let's ask that a little bit. What are examples of boundaries? Now, I don't want you to think just physical boundaries. What would be a boundary? What do you think a boundary would be in your life?
The word no.
No. So verbal. Right? Words like no. How many have trouble saying no? We talked about that last time. Maybe just a little bit. We didn't dig it around into it. Right? I said that my mom had a book in her bathroom for a long period that says it's okay to say no. Right? Some people, that's the scariest thing. People don't like to say no because they want to please people. They think it's their job to do what?
Make everybody happy.
Everybody happy. And if these people are not happy, guess whose fault it is? Well, it's obviously my fault because I didn't do something right. I didn't engage right. I didn't help them or say or do whatever it is they wanted me to do. The problem with that concept is, how easy is it to please somebody else? What do you think?
It's impossible because other people are stupid.
It's impossible because other people are stupid. I don't know if that's necessarily the argument, but I could go with it is somewhat impossible. Why is it impossible?
We're all different.
Say again.
We're all different.
We're all different. Yes. Even if they tell you, I say it's because expectations are never met. What happens with expectations? What happens if I get close to an expectation that you've set? What do you do?
Move it.
How many times have you moved an expectation on your child? Parents? How many of you have expectations of friends and they get close to meet them and then we move them? How many have jobs where expectations are set? As soon as you get close to meeting that goal over and over and over, what do?
Move the line.
They move the goal. Well, it's supposed to be 6%. Now we're bumping it to 7.5%. Well, you got close to this one, so we moved our what? See, you thought you were aimed for That was the boundary, wasn't it? Wasn't it? I'm just shooting for that boundary. I'm aiming to hit that boundary. And then they what? They up and move it. That's what happens. People have expectations. People, remember I've talked about happy. You can't make people happy because happiness is a stupid word, because happy moves around. Happy changes as soon as you get close to it. People move how they define the expectation of what makes them happy. So you don't like to say the word no because it'll make people happy, but what you've learned is I can't make people happy. It is impossible to make another person happy. It's almost impossible to be happy yourself. Because happy moves around so much, right? And then we get back to the concept of where we did a long time ago. We talked about being what? Content, which means happy where you are. That's a whole other conversation, which we've already had that class. That's online, right? But we talk about setting these boundaries. What else? Verbal, right? We tell people no. Who is that no for?
Other people.
Is it just other people?
No.
I think it's other people and yourself. Because, right, it's no, I'm not going to do that. But it's also no, I'm not going to put myself in that situation. No, I'm not going to overextend myself. No, I don't have time to add that whatever to my day. That no is not just for the other person. Remember, when we talk about boundaries, boundaries are not just boundaries against somebody else. They are also boundaries bent on what we will not allow ourselves to either be done to or do to other people. Did you know if you always say yes to somebody, you are hurting that person? What do you think about that statement? If you always say yes, you are hurting that other person. What do you think about that? Anybody agree with it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're not allowing them to figure it out and struggle on their own. If you're answering and you're responding to every time they're in trouble, you're not allowing them to grow.
Or helicopter parent, as an example. What's the helicopter? Did I spell that right? Either way, I can't spell for anybody who's new to the class. I can't spell. What is a helicopter parent? What's a lawnmower parent? Anybody ever heard of that one?
They clear the way.
Yes.
Hovers.
Yeah, helicopter just hovers.
Hovers.
They can move in and move out.
Right.
Lawnmower just clears that path.
Yeah. The helicopter parent watches everything that's going on and makes sure that the things are taken care of, right? For a general purpose. They don't want to upset or have the child be upset. The lawnmower parent, who said it clears the way? Who said that? Clears the way, right? Lawnmower parent clears the way. They get out in front of that child and remove every obstacle that ever come up. This is the parent that goes to college and argues with the professor for their freshman child. Anybody ever met that parent? This is the parent that goes to school when their child does something stupid and blames everybody but who? Or tries to make excuses. Oh, poor little Johnny's had a hard day. He didn't sleep well last night because he was up late because I have filled his schedule from moment to moment with everything going on in the world. And so we want to clear the path. They fill out their college applications for them. They fill out their job applications for them. Much easier now that it's online for the most part. They call up parents. Anybody have the parent that would call up another child's mother or father to complain that their child would not play with the other child? I've heard that in my room, my counseling room. My mother used to call. The most embarrassing thing she ever did was call my best friend's mother because me and my best friend were in a tiff. And yelled at her mother for her daughter being mean to me. What do you think that did for that relationship? Yes.
I once had a husband come in with his wife for a job interview, and that was weird. He thought he had, and he was the one speaking.
Oh, wow.
She'll make a good employee.
So tell me, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Well, she can't clean, and she can't.
He
crossed over the boundary.
Dude, that's crazy. I have had parents, when I ran the Walgreens here in town, or in several of the different Walgreens that I worked at, I had parents would come in with their child for the interview, would want to sit in the interview because their child sat there like this. They would not speak, and the child's like, oh, well, they're this, and they're this, and they're this, and they're this. You know what that child's never been able to do or had the responsibility of doing ever one time in their life? Communicate. Be responsible. I had one kid when I opened the store up in Brentwood came to me and said, he looked awful. He was dirty. He was unkempt. It was awful. He's 16, 17 years old, maybe 18. I'd like to fill out an application. Oh, why do you want a job? Mom said I had to get out of the house, stop playing video games all day. And I told the kid, yeah, no thank you. Go on about your way.
Yeah, and another thing is kids that like can't order for themselves or speak for themselves in like a restaurant or something like that. I think that's odd.
When did I start teaching you guys to order for yourself?
That's a big deal.
9, 8.
I mean, as soon as they could read the board within reason, you need to order for yourself. And I get frustrated because every now and then, he's not in here. He'll step, if you're the counter, he'll be like way over here. I like to get son, step up to the counter, look the person in the eye, and have a conversation with them. How many of you all seen that one? Right? That's just the way it is. We got to push them. So the question goes back. By always saying yes to somebody, are you helping them? Absolutely not. Because as Daniel said, they're not learning how to what?
Function or make choices.
Take care of themselves. Make decisions. Be self-determined. Be independent. Several weeks ago I told you that we had located my biological family. I had a conversation with what would be a biological nephew yesterday for a long period of time. He was asking me questions about how I do things. And he was saying his dad was exactly the same way. We've been 30, I'm 50, how old am I, 49? We've been separated 48 years. But me and him did things a lot of the same way. And it's really interesting to see that he thought the same thing. We have to teach our children to make decisions even when it's hard. We have to make them unhappy sometimes. Right? How often did I ask you guys, are you happy? And they'd say no, and I'd say, good. It's not my job to make you happy. Right?
You need to allow them to fail, too.
Yes. If we're always saying yes, that means we're always fixing the problem. Now, that's just not helicopter parenting. You can be helicopter friending. You can be helicopter co-workering. That's not a word. Right? Co-workering. Right? Co-worker community. Helicopter communitying. That's not a word. Helicopter churching. Right? There's like... Did it hurt your feelings? How many people do the work of a church?
10%.
If.
Yeah.
10%. It is always the same 15 people that do everything. Because those same 15 people cannot say no.
That is something I've worked on the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
In talking to somebody, I have backed off on a lot of things as far as feeling responsible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had somebody tell me, just let it fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't babysit everybody,
Mm-hmm.
especially not adults.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also,
No,
there's also a problem is that sometimes us 15 fail to ask others because we're afraid of being told no.
Well, I think we've been told no to the point where we no longer ask.
I think we're afraid that we're offending somebody when we ask them.
Put them on the spot.
I go back to something happened here many years ago. There were a couple of gentlemen in this congregation that were not involved. They're new Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody had asked them to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in charge of a particular program, and I asked them, would you do this? And they started out with it's a very basic, just one of them driving a bus, one was doing something else along that lines. And at first, one of them said, "No, I'm not sure about it." He wound up being an elder at a church later, and he got overlooked because he was very quiet. He just sat in the pews, and people didn't say anything to him. But he wound up developing to somebody. And I think a part of it is we're afraid we're going to get we're afraid to get our feelings hurt, and we're afraid we're going to hurt them if they might have to say no.
So that's our boundary.
Yeah,
We have created a boundary that might not be realistic.
Is what I'm trying to say. We self-impose this, and sometimes I get frustrated when they say, "We can't find anybody to do this." I want to say, "Have you asked anybody?" And it's like an old real estate agent. One time I made a lowball offer on a house, and I still remember his comment. He said, "Well, I've been told no a lot of times in my life, so one more time's not going to hurt." And lo and behold, they took the offer.
Well, we bought some property.
And it's that kind of mentality. It hadn't changed my mind. I've been told no a lot. So what? And you're not going to hurt my feelings. But we let that, when they tell us no, we take it as personal rejection. And,
Well, that's a boundary we struggle. We bought a piece of property many years ago, and talking with our agent was talking with their agent. Well, we've made offers like that, and they haven't accepted it. And we had to make the agent send the offer, and get what happened.
They took it.
They took it. No back and forth, no nothing. They took the offer. This guy, I'm just really surprised they took it. Well, maybe you should have just sent it, But that's all part of our boundary is we have built a boundary that says we are afraid to ask.
and be told no.
We're afraid to be bothered by it.
Rejected. We're not going to be rejected.
What else? What other kind of boundaries? See, this is going to be a long conversation. What other kind of boundaries are there? We got verbal boundaries. Yes, no.
Protective.
There's physical boundaries. Like, for example, some people don't like to be touched or stuff like that.
Physical boundary, not touched. Oh, what did you say?
Protective.
Protective. I'm going to write that one up here for me because we'll have to come back to it probably next week. Physical boundary. How many think a physical is a boundary? How many of you like somebody to just maul all over you? My favorite, this girl over here has a physical boundary problem. And my favorite thing to do is to poke. She's like, right? Stop touching. How many of you have that? Don't like people to come up and hug you?
You have your bubble.
She's one of those. She doesn't like to be touched. She's not a physical touch.
I like to be touched, but the difference is with you touching me, you go.
So it's a boundary with you.
It's a boundary. Well, I didn't to poke the fool out of her. Boundaries are selective.
And they can change with the people.
Yes, they can. They can change with the people. They can change with the person from one way to the other way. Okay, go. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, on physical boundaries, it may be, you don't want somebody to just come up and hug you or touch you. It may be, it may just be if they ask. If they ask you, can I hug you? It's not a problem. If they just run up and hug you, you're like, back away.
I'm a toucher. I just kind of am. I will ask people, can I put my hand on, because if I pray with you, I will do what? I'll put my hand on your shoulder. I might put my hand around your shoulders, or put my hand on your shoulder, or hold your hand. I will ask. Because not everybody wants to be touched by everybody. And I don't find it personally offensive. They don't want me to, But I ask. Is that reasonable? And it might, whether they say yes or no, might depend on what's happening in their life. Right then, I think that goes back to hers, is they change, and they can change between Sherry and Carla, me touching them. If I touch Sherry, it's going to be a different touch than I would touch Carla, right? I put my arm around Carla or something like that, or poke her in the arm or something like that. It's going to be different, but it's also going to be different because sometimes Sherry doesn't want to be touched. And no matter who you are, right? Get off me. It's just because they have, anybody have that? Where you just don't want to be touched, doesn't matter who it is, whether it's the kids or whether it's the dog
It
can
may
always
just be
touch you.
circumstances. Because sometimes
Circumstantial.
it's just like you are just you can't take anything.
Is it okay? Because I don't know if you're going to notice something, but these things are all going to do what? They're all going to weave together. Because for Kimberly, who has a physical boundary, don't touch me, she has to be able to say what? No. Because then that goes back to her being protective of who? Of herself. We're going to watch as we talk through the boundary concept that they all somewhat intertwine and intermesh together to help us better understand who we are and who other people are. It is 100% okay for Kimberly to say, Dad, don't poke me. Then I poke her because I'm a bad dad, right? But it's perfectly fine for somebody to tell you no.
No, it's
We have to tell ourselves, we can't just do whatever we want to do. All right, Bubba, and then we'll close out for the day.
It's interesting you brought up about the property lines with the rock fences.
Mm-hmm.
What most people don't understand these days, those rocks came from a certain place.
Mhm.
They came out of the field because the plow would hit them in the field.
Mhm.
And would throw you over, as my daddy would say, it's amazing how fast that mule was going when a single game plow would hit that rock. So technically, we take the fence and we build it from problems we've had in our life. The catch is how high do we build it? And what do we build it with?
So boundary is built by experiences. I want you to
So
think.
let's throw the rocks instead of build.
I want you to think about that statement. Your boundaries are built by the experiences of your life, just like anything else you do. How you allow people to engage with you is built on what you've experienced in life. I am so tired of being taken advantage of. I am saying no to everything. I have completely withdrawn and pulled away. I'm not engaging at all. Period. Zero zilch. Because I am so tired of being misused, abused, and mistreated. I would argue that all of us at some point have felt that way. Might feel that way today. You know what? That family member has taken so much advantage of me that I will not say yes to anybody for anything. One family member borrows money from me and don't pay you back. Guess what? Ain't nobody getting nothing. Because nobody's trustworthy. One of the things I deal with a lot within my counseling field is if your parents hurt you as a child, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you trust how many people? All of your relationships tend to be difficult because the two people in this world that were supposed to treat you the best and love you the most burned you and hurt you. We've probably said that in the past in class here. We've been doing this stuff for like 4 years now. All right. Thank you all for your time. Come back next week as we pick up and continue down this path of examples of boundaries as we walk through what are legitimate boundaries. All right. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your time. Hope you have a great week. See you next time.